Hello, everybody. I am Cameron, and I run a conscious gardening company. We've been working at Trindles Stores for a couple of months now, sort of helping curate the plants, a little bit of the design of the space, and offering our services and advice to people who need it. So I got into this stuff.
When you say stuff, what do you mean? Biodiversity stuff.
Gardening, and then potentially gardening for biodiversity.
Good stuff.
I came up to London to move in with my partner Natalia, and I started working for a landscaping company, and we were working in quite high-end bespoke projects, and I love the work, I love the physicality, and I like working with my hands, but it was quite devoid of love and sensitivity. We would just churn out projects. I think it felt from my end that my boss just wanted to make loads of money and then just move on to the next one. So I had this paradox, being quite happy with the actual work, but not really enjoying the kind of ethos. So I woke up one day and I was sitting, and I had the idea to start something where I could kind of create that for myself. So it's been a quite a fast journey since then. We started the company nearly 3 years ago now. So I was just doing little bits of maintenance and just working in some private gardens. But I did a design course, and slowly that led into a few projects. I was building gardens by myself, and that was a bit of a struggle. Slowly the team's grown, and now we find ourselves in a situation where we are operating on all kind of scales, doing some fun things. We've got an amazing team of people who are just wonderful, and there's a couple of people in the audience here this evening.
Can we embarrass the team by getting to wave?
Everybody wave. Go on, Susie. There you go. Now we kind of run the business, so it's got sort of three facets. So one being design, and we prefer for briefs to come in where we are able or given license to design to create habitat as well as creating beautiful spaces for the people. That's where we're at. The second facet is an installation service. So we go from design and we do the projects, and then we also offer a sort of stewardship as well. So I like to say stewardship because maintenance feels a bit sterile and inactive and passive and trying to keep things in stasis. And I don't feel like that's our role as gardeners, is to maybe just gently nudge things in a considerate direction, and doing so with a light touch. So that's a bit about me. This is Dan, everybody. Say hi to Dan.
Hello.
Who are you, Dan?
Do I give the spiel now?
Give the spiel, yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm Daniel Lee. I run a garden design business specialising in Biodiverse stroke wildlife friendly gardens down in Cambridge. And where do I start? It astonishes me that I'm the only garden designer in Cambridge that designs for biodiversity. Like you were saying, that you wake up one morning and you think, well, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And it was about 8 years ago where I was designing gardens that looked very pretty. They had loads of pretty flowers on, and it looked very wild, and it looked very it was a pastiche of what a wild space is. And yes, it would have had a benefit to wildlife in that broad sense. But I've been on a journey where more and more, it's about habitat creation and how, as designers, we can create habitat in gardens in the most aesthetically pleasing way for people that also have the gardens as the humans. Sometimes they get in the way, but there we go, they're paid for. And in addition to that, I also have a podcast where I interview people from the industry, where we talk about all different aspects of biodiversity, whether that be green walls, whether that may be community gardens, whether that is trees and biodiversity. So that's where I come from. Is that enough of the spiel?
Well, can you just talk a little bit about podcasts? I've initially found Dan because I would just be driving in the van and listening to his talks. So.
Well, I mean, I'm biased, but I think the podcast is really good because I've chosen. I know, but I've chosen people that I actually want to talk to because in the I won't bore you, but in the podcast game, you can just choose people that would increase your listenership and be very good for algorithms. And I thought, well, sod that, I'm not doing that. I'm going to interview people, chat to people, they've got something to say and a real message and real experience and are adding to the conversation. And I know, I get the feedback, I know it inspires a lot of people, but these are real conversations, real conversations about all aspects of biodiversity. And it inspires people to implement, to think about these things, to bring the conversations which I think a lot of us have, but we're kind of in our silos. And when you're actually looking at these podcasts and people are repeating back to you what you think about, I think it has a little impact. So yeah,
It's for me, so thank you. Where just before we move on, where do we find it?
So they're on YouTube. So just type in the Biodiversity Podcast by Teasels into YouTube. The clips are on Instagram and LinkedIn. If you type in Teasels Biodiverse Design, I've got my bloody handle now. Teasels Bio Design, and then you'll see the clips on there. And that's where you'll find it.
Okay, cool. So I thought maybe before we start, we could just sort of frame the conversation with a question. Question being, why biodiversity?
Because we completely rely on biodiversity. Our whole existence depends on it. The food we eat depends on it. You hear these horror stories about like almond plantations in China where there's no bloody bees and they're pollinating it by hand. You know, the water we drink, how that's filtered through groundwater, and the soil it's the biodiversity in soil. I don't know where we start with that. We completely rely on. We are part of nature. We're not separate from it. So we completely rely on it. I could talk. We could talk for the next 2 hours on that alone.
Structuring, I think, for this evening, we'll just talk a little bit about maybe what we can do potentially to encourage biodiversity into our spaces in an urban setting, which is the framing for this talk. So we try and relate that to kind of urban scale. So maybe for a little bit we could talk about some things that we could do potentially, approaches that we can take, and then going perhaps towards the latter end, we can talk about what not to do. Okay, so I think importantly is, first thing I wanted to say is just to relax a little bit. What do you think? What do you think about that?
Well, don't try. Well, let's not try and relax. Let's not try and control our gardens to the point of sterilisation, because we've got to. It's a word, a reminder for some people, but we share our gardens, or hopefully we share our gardens with other living beings. So tidying up every single leaf pruning stems down when they look slightly less than perfect. Let's not deadhead every flower out of existence. That's a good starting point.
Yeah. And maybe, I actually, just whilst we're touching on that, maybe just talking about the key to care for a moment, because we talk about relaxation, but people also need to feel and understand that read a space and understand it, see it as a legible space and a space that people can enjoy and be in, and it feels safe, comfortable, looked after.
So I think the challenge for people like us is to, how do we make wildlife, wild-looking gardens legible? Because people have got to feel, but for the basis of this conversation, feel more comfortable in their spaces. And I think that something that I think about in my work, Cameron does, and perhaps something you can take on to your own gardens, is thinking about the edges of, say, a bed. If you have an area of wildflower meadow in your garden, think about the edges, delineate those edges so you're delineating volumes of space within your garden. And then within those spaces, well, say for example, a very easy win is if you have an area, a wildflower meadow area in your garden, rather than it spill out everywhere and spill out onto the path, just go around the outside with the mower, do one strip around the outside, and then you have that volume of space delineated. That's a start. Mm-hmm. And then think about, well, then when you're delineating those spaces and you're creating that edge, what you're also doing is you're creating what we call an ecotone, where one habitat type meets another. At that point, it's the best place for those overlapping habitats that we get the maximum amount of biodiversity as well. So it has a visual impact and an ecological impact as well.
Yeah. We look after this big communal garden in Marble Arch, and we've got this very kind of loose, naturalistic style in the beds. We're creating lots of little dog piles and things around the space, but ultimately it's a space that is occupied by a lot of people that don't quite understand this kind of conversation, and they really, if we leave untidiness, visible untidiness in the space, we will get complaints straight away. So we have to work very hard to make the lawns look really nice and the edges to be really tidied, and that allows for us to be a bit looser in those areas that potentially aren't as visible, or just looser in the beds.
Yeah. But then you use the phrase "cue to care," and that's a phrase that's kind of used within our industry. So it's about being creative with your maintenance as well, because say for example you are cutting down, some hedging or whatever. Rather than cart that away, all those clippings, you could make a dead hedge from it. You could stack it. You could stack the pile of cuttings that you produced in a geometric pattern, or you could create a variety of sort of brushwood piles. So it creates that visual anchor, that visual continuity, and at the same time you are creating habitat as well.
Mm-hmm.
So as designers and as we need to be mindful of using the design principles that we've learned, whilst also creating habitat as well.
Mm-hmm.
Repetition, form, scale, proportion. Mm-hmm. That's something that really makes our gardens, and can make your gardens more legible, and it not look like an afterthought. The habitat creation not being an afterthought.
Also, just thinking when you were saying that, is just about sort of signposting things as well. Sort of maybe making it, if the space is sort of front facing, if it's a front garden and it looks a little bit untidy, but you're doing it for a reason, then maybe just leave a little sign, and just to suggest to somebody as they're walking past that this is a deliberate and considered thing.
Yeah, 100%. And I think signage play. I mean, there was a project we were working on in just outside of Cambridge, companies were spending over £1,000 on signage boards because it needs to tell a story. Because we need to take people on this journey. We need to explain why we are doing certain things. And I found that once people know, then they buy into it. They really buy into it, and they can see the story. They can They can see that that log path of that, and why we left that area of long grass. Blah blah blah. It's we were talking about it earlier. It's all about education.
Okay, so maybe something that might be important from a design perspective to touch upon is the use of structure, and maybe verticality, and creating a sense of scale in the garden, which allows for that kind of looseness.
I think what you're touching on is within the design, it's having these strong elements. So when you said verticality, I was thinking about green walls, and somebody in the audience knows a lot about green walls. She's in a light of her own. Hello, Rosie.
Oh.
Talk about verticality and green walls. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
But joking aside, it's about having a strong backbone, strong features in the garden. Whether that is, an architectural tree which may be native, maybe that is a curvilinear log wall, maybe that is like you've done on your lovely project in Wimbledon, where you've got a really strong. Is the client here today?
Kate's a million. Say hi, Kate.
There we go. Wonderful pond, absolutely superb. But that's a strong statement, isn't it? So it's functional, but it's a strong statement. And then that juxtaposition to the planting. That's where you get the balance. Now we can talk about the type of planting. Would you like to touch on that?
Yes.
Because again, if we're thinking about planting, I could literally talk for 3 hours on this. If we're talking about planting, we need to begin to be more mindful of what plants we are using, how they actually fit into the ecosystem.
Why?
Because we can do, so look around here. Great, we've got some lovely plants, and that's fine. And they're in flower, and that's cool. It's very cool. Great for pollinators. But we have to remind ourselves that over the last millions of years, that the native invertebrates and the native plants have co-evolved. So, the use of native plants, which have co-evolved, or the insects have co-evolved to use these plants as part of their life cycle, that is fundamental. So we can have pretty gardens that are great for pollinators, and that's fine. I've got no problem with that, obviously. But we've got to think about our gardeners. Well, we want our gardens to be edible. We want our gardens to be used. We want our gardens to be a food source for biodiversity. We talk about biodiversity and sort of urban ecology, because I live in Cambridge and surrounded by arable fields. It's a bloody wasteland. You may get some generalists, but the vast majority of our wildlife is moving more towards the cities. It really is, or suburbia as well.
So what's your approach then with your planting? How do you approach your design project? How are you blending natives and non-natives?
Yeah.
What's your remit?
So my remit is to be being mindful of the aesthetic, but trying to put as many food plants in as possible. And more and more we're looking at sort of 50-50 of native plants to non-native or ornamentals, and then thinking about what can actually be eaten by caterpillars. Also thinking about that nectar resource, so thinking about mid-January with your early flowering iris, all the way up to all the way up to November, thinking about that continuous nectar resource. So that's, and at the same time, if you have an aesthetic as well, that's great.
So we're kind of touching on succession planting.
Yeah.
Can you maybe talk a little bit about sort of layering planting together? How do we occupy those different niches within a planting scheme so that these plants all work together?
Yeah. So, okay. So then, how do we say this to non-professionals? Because if you are doing this layering planting, where you have different plants occupying the same spaces, you've got to be planting really, really deeply. So you are planting, you can go in the gardening books and they say, 4 plants per square metre and 5 plants. We're looking at sort of 10 plants per square metre. So when one plant does its thing and then goes down, the next plant's taking over. So you have that continuous vegetation. So, and then thinking about, well, what sort of plants would we use? So we're looking at, in early spring, you've got your woodland plants, but again by sort of late April, perhaps mid-May, they've done their thing, they've gone over, or the flowers have gone over. So then you are bringing in your early summer flowering plants. And again, to achieve that, you kind of do have to go down the native mixed with non-native, which isn't a bad thing, but that's really, I don't think that's sort of transposed into this layering planting, is transposed into the sort of your sort of generalist gardener, your home gardener. But I think that's the way to achieve this really successional planting that's the way to do it. Plant deeply and be thinking about where you're getting the plants from. Be thinking about where those plants come from in the wild and the niches and where they are growing in their natural habitat, and try and replicate that as much as possible in your garden.
Mm-hmm. So just quickly, maybe we could touch on, it might be helpful just to understand those kind of, what are those layers? So you traditionally maybe in ecological planting, above ground you've got maybe 3 layers, a ground cover, mid layer.
Yep. So you have a ground cover, mid layer, and I think we call it the ascent plants, don't we?
Or emergent.
Yeah. So this is trying to, as best as we can, replicate how plants grow in the wild. It talks about growing plants in communities, which is the big difference, which has come on the last sort of 10-15 years, where people have grown plants as specimens. People have grown individual plants. So we'll have an agapanthus from over here, we'll have a fern from over there, and they're all different parts of the world, and it's rather artificial. But what our industry's been doing over the last few years is trying to replicate these natural plant communities, plants that would grow together in the wild, and trying to replicate how they grow in the wild. So certain plants would grow really tall, called emergence. Certain plants would be ground covering plants because they would have a different type of root system, so they would spread out to fill the gaps. And then you would have certain sort of evergreen species that would hold the space throughout the year. So yeah, I think it's positive. So thinking about plants, thinking about arranging plants in communities rather than individual plants put together, and that comes with its own problems, really. Well, not problems, but it comes with its own maintenance requirements, because they're all from different parts of the world and they all need individual maintenance, whereas communities, you're managing them at the same time.
Extensive instead of intensive, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what does that look like? Just to give people an idea.
Well, it looks like that. I mean, on the ground, it looks like you are managing these plant communities, or these types of planting, different times of the year, so you're managing it as one rather than managing it on a sort of a weekly basis and a weekly or fortnightly basis. That's a practical way to look at it. But yes, you are thinking about them as a whole rather than individuals.
I think that kind of reduced, maybe an increased level of understanding about plants, but maybe a reduced amount of intensity of activity when it comes to the gardening is.
Yeah, and to that point, it's sort of getting over, and we try with our clients to get over that. You don't need to be. We talk going full circle about relaxing. You don't need to be in your garden like manicuring these plants day in, day out. Otherwise, they'll just explode or they'll just fall apart. You know, it is a relaxed way to wildlife gardening. In that broad term, is should be more relaxed. Should be less intensive. There's periods of intensity, if that's the right term to use, but but not all the time.
Something I maybe lead things forward is to just talk a bit about observation. Maybe just understanding the context that we find our gardens in. So everybody's site is different, and maybe just being sensitive to that and not trying to create something that you've seen elsewhere, but maybe just allowing yourself that period of observation and how important that might be.
So let's clarify. When you say observation, you're talking about, you're probably not talking about where the sun hits in the afternoon, or where you're going to have your bottle of wine at the end of the night, or
those things are important too from a user perspective, for sure. And I think what I'm trying to touch at is maybe just what ecological niche is your garden? Where is it fitting in the wider ecosystem?
Yeah, and trying not to force something into a space. For example, as a crude example, not everybody, but people want a wildflower meadow. And I don't know how many times people come up to me and say, well, let's really want a wildflower meadow. And sometimes your soil is too rich and the soil is too productive for that to happen. So you can force it, but then you're no better than sort of having a sort of a manicured garden. If you're trying to force these habitat types into your garden, then you're kind of onto a loose.
So in that context, what would you recommend if someone's got a high fertility soil, if someone's had a garden that's been well managed for many years, what would you do?
Yeah, so you may not be able to have a really lovely wildflower meadow, which is really short and full of flowers, but having an area of long, coarse grass, thick grass, an area of it, is equally as beneficial. Because that lovely cool environment, when we're going to have these fluctuations in temperature, that lovely cool environment is fantastic. It's fantastic for amphibians. It's fantastic for loads of moths. It's fantastic for mice. Where are they going to be when we have these 40-degree heat, or this changing climate? And then thinking about that as well, like when you were saying about having an area, I think we've also got to think about your garden, I would suggest, as a stepping stone. Because I would definitely say your garden needs to be a stepping stone. So having an area of long grass which connects your garden to next door, we need to connect our spaces. Although our gardens are owned by us, they need to be joined up. Talk to your neighbours, thinking about how you can connect your gardens together. An easy win is a gap in the fence for a hedgehog hole. That's pretty standard. But working with what you've got.
Mm-hmm. So I find that so exciting.
Yeah,
you can be a part of the place, and you can help to facilitate and try and bring out what that space wants to be, as opposed to trying to be work in opposition.
Yeah. Well, we need to be careful, because what that space would be, if left unmanaged, would be probably in London's Sycamore scrub, and then your garden would be, depending on whereabouts in London, sycamores, ash, yeah. So there needs to be, you know, doesn't need to be, but there's got to be mindful of management.
So,
Water. Yeah. So, depending on the size of your garden, you know, having water to a lesser or greater extent is really helpful. Even down to a small bowl. It was a great. So, got a friend who was sent me a picture the other day, and she has a small bowl, just a saucer, and she had 3 rocks in it, and on those rocks she had moss, and you could see 5 or 6 bees using that to have a drink, to suck up the moisture from the moss. And so any amount of water in a garden is important. Again, if you've got the space, have a pond, have a multi-layered pond, have a shallow, you know, have you know, marginals, you can have all of that, but even, you know, an area, literally, you could have even an old ice cream carton full of water in the corner of your garden going rancid, and that's even great for, you know, for soil fertilizing. You know, it's just, yeah, I would just say any amount of water in the garden is preferable. And like I say, it's to make the point that if you've got a, you know, it doesn't have to be a pond. You know, there is a use to any amount of water in the garden. And if you think about it, we're in a bloody desert, really, aren't we? If you think about it, London, we have this feast and famine. You know, we have these periods of long dry periods, and then you have these weather events. So we've got to be mindful of that as well. So having a consistent amount of water in the garden, topped up, is really useful.
when we came to Kate's on when they're going to do a project a few weeks ago, she had sunk a little old sink into one of her beds, and we found frog and a newt and scouted around, and it just shows you just recycling somewhere like that, so simple, just sinking into the ground, can be really beneficial to certain things. So yeah, something to certainly consider.
And it's amazing, like how wildlife find, the cheesy things. If you build it, they will come. We were working. It's not necessarily about aquatic environments, but we was on a project last week, and the client had this. I mean, people love raised beds for no bloody reason. Just a raised bed, just for a laugh. So we were just, I just don't understand. Anyway, I don't understand it. Anyway, so the raised bed was on the patio, looked awful, but it was made of oak. It did. So it made of oak sleepers, and then we're dismantling it, and it was full to the brim of stag beetles, and it was a walled garden. And you're like, well, and it was so with that we sort of flipped the project, and then kept the sleepers, kept the stag beetles both as larvae and the adults, and we created a hibernaculum, a really big hibernaculum on the project as well. So again, in the same respect that if you put these elements into your garden, it is amazing that they will get used. So
well, that leads us nicely on to the use of dead wood, dead material, organic matter, and log piles in a space as well.
Yeah. So dead wood. I mean, there's more. As a case in point, there are more things use an oak tree when it's dead than when it's alive. So dead wood is the worst. Is the worst thing you can say. It's not dead. It's having it. So having dead wood in your garden, whether that is dead wood in the shade, whether that's dead wood in dappled shade, whether that is wet wood where it's like sitting in, it's sitting on, I don't know, edge of a pond maybe. It's and having those different types of dead wood in your garden really important. Again, it's having that structure in your garden. I don't know if I've used the phrase, but just think about your garden. You've got to give them bed and breakfast. You've got to give them something to eat, and somewhere to sleep, and procreate. Using dead wood as one case in point, really important.
And it's important to say as well, you can do these things in very aesthetically lovely ways.
Yeah. So if you think about a simple win is a sort of V post. The V post really needs to be have a good depth, so 15 centimetre squares, and you drill holes into them in different diameters of holes for the different size bees. Just as a worthy reminder, there's not just one bee species in this country, the honeybee. There are 279 other species of varying sizes. You can do that. So you can put a bee post in your garden. But what that is, that's only replicating sort of having dead wood. So in the wild, when you've got a dead branch in a tree, what would happen is the fungus would degrade it. Then the dead wood beetles would burrow into it to degrade the wood even more, and then the bees would then make their galleries and use that in the wild. So that's what we're trying to replicate, really. But yes, you can do it in very, very architecturally, visually striking ways, which is the sweet spot, really, isn't it? Is to create a functional design which looks good and is actually being used.
Okay, well that makes me think about sort of different niches as well that we're trying to create in a garden. So whether that's topographies or landform, or just to maximise those kind of little ecotones that you touched upon earlier.
Yeah, and topography is a big one. I mean, again, if you think about if you can vary the heights in your garden, vary the heights of soil in your garden, that's really important. If you can create...
Why is it important?
Okay, so then I'm going to use a word that the garden fraternity doesn't use a lot. Is stress. If you take stressful conditions where you have areas of drought stress, or you have areas of... You also have different aspects where you have a sunny south-facing mound, if you like, which has a certain stressful conditions, and then you have a sort of the north-facing aspect. You're varying those conditions, but it's those stressful conditions which allow for the greatest floral diversity. When you have really productive ground, that's when there's a greater chance you have less biodiversity, because you have over-dominant species that take over, and therefore you lose. You have one dominant species or a few dominant species and less diversity. So embracing stress through topography, embracing stress through not feeding. They're not compost here, have they? Before I start to slate it.
There was a bit of compost at the back, yes.
Good. Well, it should be chucked over the fence. But using stress to our advantage, basically.
Okay, so what is quite a nice little segue into potentially the exploration of recycling materials and substrates in a space, and why that might be used. I just want to say as a caveat, I don't think that's an answer to everything. But there is potential if you inherit a space that already has a lot of aggregates, a lot of hardcore. There is a potential to create planting schemes that maximise diversity by using that low fertility that we're talking about.
So I feel we do need, and it's proven, that we do need to move away from productivity, moving away from overfeeding our plants. Because they don't need it, they don't get it in the wild, whatever that word means. And when you have productive, like I say, when you have productive soils, then that works against having the greatest diversity of species. One way to do it is, what like Cameron touched on, is using aggregate. So aggregate is stuff like this. Basically, they're rocks. No organic matter, very little organic matter. You're just creating mineral soils. And that's what, if you look, that's a big element of soils. If you put some soil underneath a microscope, they're just multitudes, very small rocks, sand, silt and clay particles. So productivity in soil, or the lack of productivity in soil, is our friend. And you can use products like this alpine gravel, you can use sands, you can use recycled materials like recycled crushed concrete. I could go on.
We went to design a garden up in Banbury last year, and it had mostly astroturf like across the whole space. And instead of designing that completely, ignoring the fact that that was there and trying to start from scratch, I realised that there was the potential underneath that there was going to be loads and loads of hardcore. So instead of proposing that we spend loads of money and time and effort to take that off site, why don't we take off the astroturf, break into it, and then plant species that are going to enjoy that environment? So we created a scheme that saved the client money, is very low maintenance because of the low fertility, but it's also it's just a really neat way to bring things back into that kind of quite devoid space.
Yeah, because like you say, there are plants. There's a multitude of plants out there that thrive on stressful drought conditions. And what was implied with what you were saying is, why cart off all of that stuff underneath the astroturf? Because there's another element to this where you've got to think about the impact you're having, the embodied carbon, all the resources that you're using in our gardens. So if we can use recycled material and not cart stuff out off site, that's a win-win. Although the conversation is about biodiversity tonight, we can't just be all about biodiversity, but we'll just have a blind spot about our resource use as well. That's a conversation for another day, but we've got to think about that as well. So recycled products rather than carting, a paving stone or materials on the other side of the world to our garden in sunny London. It doesn't sit right with me.
Yeah, interesting.
That's a kind of word.
I've just seen the time and it's getting on, so maybe just quickly, before we move on to a couple of things that we should avoid, is there any other things that you want to share or touch upon?
No, because let's open up to some questions.
Yeah, sure.
But don't bloody spray. Don't bloody spray. Don't use, sorry.
No, I was just going to say we need to just touch upon what not to do potentially.
Yeah.
Just a few things.
Yeah, so not be too tiny. Reduce, let's not use chemicals.
Why not to use chemicals? Can you explain?
Yeah, because despite what the label says, you're putting these synthetic chemicals into the ecosystem. And they don't disappear, don't evaporate into the ether and just disappear. They enter the food chain. They are mucking up, and they enter the food chain, and they enter our groundwater, which affects us as well. And what we are doing is, if we only left it alone and allowed natural predators, like happened before all these synthetic chemicals have been produced over the last 100 years, if we allowed natural predators to do their job, then we would just get back to where we were before we thought we could do something better with synthetic chemical in the bottle.
So what would your response be if a client came to you and said that they had a specific problem with a specific insect or something that they wanted to get rid of, what would you say?
I wouldn't say it's a problem. I said I would sort of allow it. I mean, to me, I would kind of rejoice in it. I know that's probably not your sort of question, but allowing stuff to happen. If there is a problem, or they perceive it as a problem, then that probably wouldn't be one of my clients. But again, you would try and find its natural predator. Or in a sort of crude sense, go onto these sort of websites that sell all these natural predators and buy them a product to solve a problem. But
so that makes me think about just like reframing that situation a little bit in the mind of that individual that might be a little bit worried about it.
But it's a reframe. But then, from our point of view, it's an opportunity to educate, isn't it? It's an opportunity to educate. You see, what is it at the moment? You see loads of the ermine moth on the spindle. I mean, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. But it gives you an opportunity to sort of, it's not the end of the world. It may defoliate. Some of it may die. And it may come back, and that's it. It's an opportunity. It's a learning opportunity. So what are you going to do? Spray it? You'll come back next year? I mean, what are you going to do?
And maybe another thing wants to take its place.
Yeah.
So there'll be a natural succession of things, following on from that current. It doesn't have to be a cause for panic necessarily.
But it's an opportunity for them to get more client, to get more connected to their space, to actually watch it. You talk about observation. You talked right at the beginning about observation. Well, watch how it develops. Watch what comes to feed on it. When you put in a bee post, which holes are filled first. It's really interesting. Like because we're all learning. So the project in Peckham last week, and the bee post that was put up was absolutely great. None of the holes bloody used. It was in a sunny position. But what was really getting used was some of this self-binding gravel, and on top of the self-binding gravel was a log. And there was so much, and this bottom of a north-facing fence, and there was so much activity underneath these logs. And it was like, well, we put the bee post there. We're not using it. So it's about observing. And then again, that will inform, or should inform, how the garden evolves. And for that client, she's taking notice of it. She's great.
I think the last thing I just wanted to touch on is just maybe not removing everything from the space. Maybe leaving leaves, and maybe just a quick conversation about why that is important.
Yeah, because again, we've come full circle. We share our gardens with wildlife. So, what is the point of removing all the leaves when they are? You would hope you've got larvae or you've got eggs on those leaves, and you want to just put them in a green bin and have them taken off site, or having a pile of leaves in the corner of your garden. Well, if I was a if I was a bumblebee, where would I be looking? I'd be looking for my nest right in there. So we've got to think about, well, if we're getting rid of all this, what might want to be used, what's going to be using it, what might want to be using it. And it's a natural resource. Why would you? I always found it crazy. Why remove all the leaves? Even from a horticultural point of view, why remove all that good leaf matter and then bring in compost? You've got that. It's a natural resource.
Yeah, it's nature's mulch.
It has been for the last millions of years. Why are we just removing it for cleanliness?
Okay. Well, I think, given the time, maybe if anybody has any kind of questions or anything like that, then feel free to put your hand up.
Well, I'll shout.
Thin shrouds.
So what?
So what do you do about marvellous sawflies laying their eggs on your gooseberry bush and it being defoliated within 3-4 days? And certainly we don't use chemicals, but as a result we don't get any good.
I can't answer that. I don't know much about gooseberries.
Sorry. I wouldn't worry about the gooseberries, we're worrying about... I think the technique is to get rid of... You wait till the wretched caterpillars are wretched, because there are millions of them, there are hundreds of them, gnawing away, and presumably only half of them actually ever fledge, because they run out of food themselves, good Malthusian principle.
Yes.
They do, exactly. They run out of food.
Well, anyway, what do you think?
Kennedy can hose them off. Sawfly larvae.
I know.
Something as obvious as sawfly larvae. You just get the
water.
Put your thumb over the
what
end of
do
the
you do
hose
about
and squirt them off. It works.
No. But the issue is, what do you do generally as when a client, which I'm not yet, comes to you with that problem? Do you say, oh well, don't bother growing gooseberries this year, next year as well? Because the eggs are being laid
Yeah.
when you don't know.
Yeah, I mean, again, if it's if it becomes a problem like that, again, I'm not going to. Certainly not going to spray. And if it becomes a problem, then you would give the general advice about having resistant cultivars. But again, yeah.
Going back to what we said at the start, I'm quite a lazy gardener. So I would probably just look at that as a situation where I would just say, okay, well, that's the reality. Let's try something new. I honestly don't think like there's any point just like beating your head in or something if it's not going to work. I just think it's just such a waste of time. So maybe just do something different and trial something out. I think that's the joy of gardening, isn't it? We're always experimenting and always learning from mistakes or learning from situations that arise that we can't predict, and that makes it really fun. So yeah, just taking a different tact, I suppose.
Actually, I know these gooseberry bushes that he's talking about, so I'm married to him. And I wasn't actually going to talk about the gooseberry bushes, but I will say, and I'll tell, he might not have seen them yet, but they're covered in leaves and fruits this year, so the sawfly larvae probably didn't survive last year properly, and so we haven't got any this year, so all is good. So I would say leave it all alone and let it take its course. Yeah.
Enough from us.
Can I say something about leaving leaves in the garden and not tidying them away? I'm really pleased to hear that, because I've been talking about this for years. And finally, actually last January, we wrote to all of our garden maintenance or garden, what would you say? Curation, garden stewardship client, all of our garden stewardship clients all over North London. And I actually timed it so that they wouldn't think I was trying to get out of doing the work and taking away the rubbish. I wrote to them all in January saying, listen, we've just cleared all of your leaves from the garden spaces, and we would really like to next autumn leave the leaves in full beds.
Yeah.
And of the clients who replied, which was about 60% of them, all were positive. Absolutely all of them, except I explained the ecology and the the number of animals that would be using that leaf litter, and they all said, "Yep, go ahead and leave them in place next winter," and we will.
That's cool.
Obviously remove them from lawns and paths, and just leave them in the beds.
It's just having that conversation, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I think as soon as people would understand it,
quite a long email explaining exactly the animals.
Yeah.
We didn't. I was tempted to put in a few pictures, but I thought no. Some of the creepy crawlers in leaf litter, particularly in an enlarged picture, look a bit alarming.
Yeah.
So I just described them and named a couple of them, and everybody accepted the argument.
Yeah.
And the other thing, of course, is people love to have the birds in their gardens,
Mm.
and the robins and the wrens are actually grubbing around in there, and the blackbirds taking things out
the
from the
blackbirds
leaf
used
litter.
to.
Yeah.
Well, around us they still are. So yeah, so if they want their birds, leave the leaves alone.
Yeah, that's an important point, isn't it? Sometimes we have clients that don't, like actually Natalia doesn't really like creeper crawlies.
It's having that target species, because I don't like that term. But when I meet clients, they say, "Oh, we want a wildlife garden." Great. So what do you mean? Do you mean you want some Nepeta so you can see the bees, or I mean, we've got a lovely project, an ongoing project for the last 5 years, massive garden outside of Cambridge. And I'm putting it in this way because they spent loads of money on their garden. But for the client, it was all about the birds. All of that was for birds because they enjoy sitting in their window and seeing birds. So, you know, we have to think about, those target species. You want to see birds? Leave it, leaves and limbs. That's amongst other things. But do you know what I mean? That's kind of. So I often find that what do people when people say biodiversity, what wildlife friendly garden? What are they actually? What really turns them on? What's that makes them feel connected to nature? So,
Any suggestions on what to do about eco-friendly slugs?
So what do you mean by
Slugs. They eat the plants.
Yeah. Allow them to eat the plants. Or find some. Well, it depends. I mean, it depends on your plant choices. So what's in your garden?
They're particularly fond of dahlias.
I thought that actually. Yeah. Get rid of your dahlias, and then put some wildflowers in. There you go. Problem solved. End of answer. But yes, yeah. I mean, again, be thinking about. I mean, it is. I mean, it's said slightly in jest, but think about your plant choices because you've got dahlias, probably got hostas in there.
Not anymore.
Well, no, but what? Yeah. So again, you get slug pellets and all the rest of it. But I wouldn't be bringing that into a garden. Think about. I think it's an opportunity to really modify what plants are in your garden. Now, if you have a sort of a quintessential English garden with, with dahlias and delphiniums and stuff like that, well, there is an argument to say, modify your plant choices, really.
Not anymore. I don't have any of those slugs anymore.
Could I comment on this one? There are actually only a very few slug species that eat garden plants that you would care about anyway. The vast majority of slug species in this country, about 40-ish, only 3 or 4 of them actually eat garden plants. Most of them eat algae, dead material. Some of them eat other slugs. The big spotty ones, the leopard slug, they're eating other slugs. But they won't be killed by slugs. Leave them alone. But the worst are the brown snails, particularly Cornuospersum, the so-called garden snail. They are the worst offenders. But they're quite easy to catch. You can see where they sleep at night. They lift up ivy on walls and you see them all roosting there and sleeping for the night. Just smash them.
Spoil them and eat them. Garlic.
Just kill them and then the slugs will come and eat the corpses.
You talk about wildflower meadows, and I've got some wet bits, and I want to put things like cuckoo flower or lady smock on sort of damp soil. But you can't find the seeds, and I'm certainly not going to take them from the wild.
You can buy
You can.
flower seeds. You can buy them.
No.
So this is a.
I can't remember.
I can.
Can
So-
you? Yeah.
So,
do
but
it.
this brings up.
I buy them, but I can't remember where we get them from.
Yeah. So it brings up that there are many suppliers out there: Emmersgate Seeds, Naturescape,
Naturescape.
Boston
They're
Seeds.
good.
There are there is a market out there, so you can find it. So but it's also thinking about, so if you go to places like Emmersgate Seeds or Naturescape, then you've got to think about the provenance of the seeds as well. So but I know there's other people out there that on Facebook pages or websites where you can do sort of plant swaps and seed swaps out there. So but there's no shortage of wildflowers, new wildflower seeds out there for what you're talking about, and suppliers out there. Yeah, Emma sounds like an advertisement for Emmersgate Seeds. Emmersgate Seeds are
Spelled Emmersgate.
Emmersgate, so that's my Cambridge accent coming out there. I've been trying to disguise it. They're a great, but they grow the seeds in their fields in Norfolk and in Bath, so it's UK provenance. So, yes. You're in, so
Why don't you like compost?
Why you don't like compost?
Not they don't like I don't like compost. If I'm trying to establish or trying to have a biodiverse planting, adding compost, adding nutrients to the soil in that application works against it, because you're adding nutrients to that soil. And then, for example, if you are trying to establish a wildflower meadow, if you add nutrients to that soil, then what's more likely to happen is those nutrients will be taken up by grasses. The grasses will grow strong, and the grasses will outcompete the slower growing wildflowers. So the adding of nutrients in certain applications via compost just works against that.
But in an established garden, would you ever put compost on it?
That's a broad.
I think it's contextual, to be honest. I mean, it depends what you're looking at, where that spot is. For example, if it was in a heavily shaded area, and the plants that you've got naturally from that environment in a woodland setting require more nutrients because they receive that from the decaying matter of the leaves, then I would consider doing like a course of mulching once a year, and we do that in some of our projects. Because that's what those plants in that kind of plant community require. But conversely, if it was in an open setting where a lot of the sun-loving, drought-tolerant plants that were in the garden were living, then I wouldn't worry too much.
But that's the thing when you are sort of an established garden where you have perhaps established plants, and like Cameron was saying, where you have a mixture of different plants from different parts of the world, like grasses from grasses, Mediterranean plants, but they don't need it. But the delphinium next to it does benefit from it. So that it kind of creates that imbalance of conditions. Some really like it, some really hate it, or some really like it, will grow strong, and some don't get that kind of treatment or input of nutrients at all in their life cycle in the wild. So hopefully that kind of answers your question. Yes.
On the subject of compost and mulch, do you advocate forest bark the bark chippings to suppress weeds and perhaps keep moisture in the soil?
No, not really. What I would do is I would be aiming more towards, well, how can we cover the soil to suppress weeds, if that's what we want to achieve? Well, I would be aiming towards covering the soil, but with vegetation, with plants. That's what I would be aiming more towards.
And if we have a lot of drought, dry conditions, the soil is drying up a lot, and it's difficult to keep them conditions. What would you do, I suppose, just grow the right plants for drought?
100%. We have got to be thinking, oh God, that's a can of worms. You know, like we've got to be thinking about the next 50, 100 years. You know, our climate is accelerating and it's changing, and the plants that need all that water and need that thick mulch, you can keep these plants on life support, or you can be thinking about, well, where is our climate heading? Because in the next 25 years, which is really scary, London is going to be like the south of France. So look what's growing in the south of France. Think about that's what we're going to have to be growing. There's a cheery thought for me.
Excuse me. More and more people are living in flats today.
Yeah.
So have you ever done any work with people who want to put plants on their balconies, for example?
No.
Because the designers of the flats don't consider it. The nearest thing they do is to put a balcony there.
Yeah.
And there are people who like to have pots and things there. So how do you help them?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm just trying to think of if I've done a balcony. No, I haven't. But I guess I'll make the broad point is it can still be really useful. You know, even we talk about stepping stones. I'm kind of not answering your question. And Cameron, if you've done a balcony, then you can butt in. But
because they have started to put plants on rooftops in the cities. So, you know, there is some thought going on.
well, there is.
What about the flats? Because there's so many flats everywhere you look now. There are flats, and they should have plants.
They should have plants. I mean, again, there is in Cambridge where I live. There is a lot of these large blocks of flats and communal areas where they have on the 14th floor on the communal balcony they have trees in pots, which is it's quite an interesting concept because it's basically a tree in a pot and will only have a finite life. But again, I'm coming at this point because again, if we talk about drought conditions, you know, if you're ever planting plants in pots or hanging baskets, you play God. You are the one that has to keep that live. So drought tolerant planting as a starting point, at least.
I think you can have fun with potted plants. I mean, I'm not of the view that we need to be dogmatic with what we're talking about. And if planting up a planter or creating a nice cute display gives you a bit of joy, then go for it. I don't think that there's anything to be ashamed of in that. And actually, ultimately, taking joy and connecting with a little bit of green is a beautiful experience, and it's a beautiful thing that can inspire us to want to protect the environment and to do other things. So, yeah, I mean, it's a really lovely opportunity to just have a little window for people into that. And you don't need a big space to do something fun. That's quite an important thing to note as well. I mean, you can see some of the little window box displays around Trindle, and you can see you can create really beautiful things, and that it's also important as humans to experience beauty, I think, and that's I think why we do what we do, because we ultimately love and we take a lot of solace and serenity from connecting with nature. So,
but they can still, even a window box can still be a stepping stone.
At Chelsea, don't they?
So again?
At Chelsea Flower Show, they now do, I think, a competition or something for window boxes.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're talking about communication being a key part of translating what you're doing in the practice to the client. But is there ever been, I just thought of it now, a moment where you've not communicated it to bypass their dogmatic beliefs, but to actually achieve action within the garden? Because a lot of the time with my clients, it's either you're preaching to the masses, they believe in what you do, and they want to see that through, and have employed you to do that. But I'd say still the majority of people, their ideals of what a garden should be is not necessarily for biodiversity in nature. So has there been a point where you've effectively lied?
No. So
laying off what you're saying, beauty, of course, that's a really important way of translating biodiversity to people. So, you know, creating nice structures, bee posts or whatever, diverse planting plans. But if they're really, you know, got their eyes on their delphiniums or whatnot, and how do you bypass that? Do you say no, or do you?
So if I'm talking specifically about,
or do you communicate more with them?
So those types of clients don't come my way.
Right, okay.
Because I've worked very hard.
They come my way.
Well, I'd be really like boring now. Like I'm very conscious about my website. I'm conscious about what I put on social media, and everything that comes out of my mouth is about biodiversity. So if somebody finds Teasels, then unless they're blind, they know what they're going to get.
Right. Yeah.
So to answer your question, talk about education. Where you get the best results, if that's a term, is where there's been a lot. So with a lovely client just outside of Cambridge, we spent 18 months in the design process. Did loads of concepts, and then we took the clients. So I, did pretty pictures and said, okay, well, what do you think? And they said, great, right. So there was a meadow over there in the design. There was this, ponds, blah, blah, blah. So we said, okay, do you like that? Do you like that? Do you like the arrangements? Okay. So what we did is we went, okay, if you like that, we're going to go to, if you like that meadow, what we're going to do is we're going to go to Meadow A in Cambridge, Meadow B in Essex, and Meadow C in Hertfordshire. We're going to sit there and we're going to talk about pros and the cons of each of these meadow types. So we spent 18 months. It was an education. Forget the design. It was the education where it was like, there's no silver bullet here. All elements of your garden are going to look good at a certain time of the year, and going to look crap at certain other times of the year. And these are the pros and cons. So hopefully that answers your questions. It was really all about the education. To education, expectation management, as it might be said as well.
I also think it's like it's not doing yourself a disservice to just say, okay, well, you can go so far with somebody, and if they're still not along with the journey, you can say, well, maybe it's worth reaching out to somebody that can potentially do this for you, and that's not a bad thing,
right.
because when you end up taking on, just from your point of view, when you take on jobs like that, you're not actually in love with what you're doing.
And it's hard, you know what? And it's unfair. It's unfair on the client because it's hard work, and they're spending a lot of money, and you're not going to give your all, and that's unfair. And some people may want to do the Indian sandstone paving and all the other crap. Let them do that. That's their passion. And let them get the value, the client get the value.
I guess, is there a way of it being embedded within the design rather than being at the forefront? So it's not, they're going to still achieve the garden they want.
There's
going to be habitats or whatever structure, planting scheme, because a lot of people don't know much about plants. So if you introduce things in there which mimics, their ideals of like a classic garden and embedded in structure within essentially the fence posts or
but then that comes
or the landscape.
Perhaps that's not a horticultural question. It's more of how you're selling it, isn't it? How you can curate your design presentations in a way that tick the box. It's not being,
Yeah.
and that's not being. Perhaps it is being slightly fancy with words.
Yeah.
You're not, and I,
It's ultimately their garden though, isn't it? So you can't suggest it's too dramatic. I'm just thinking of ways to not lie, but not be too much of a forefront. So that your impact is larger and we're not just doing it for people who are into it anyway, you know what I mean?
But I think that if you can take people on a journey, if your design process is rushed and it's like, oh, we've got to gather, we want, they phone you up in January and they want the garden done by March. It's just never going to work. And you're going to get buyer's remorse. So you need to say, calm down, slow down. If you're going to, from the initial conversation to the installation of the garden, you need that time. Buyer's remorse is real crap. When people aren't brought up to speed, or they don't know what they don't know. And they need you, they need me, they need Cameron to hold their hand and educate them. And if after that education they're not up for it, then it's only going to bite you in the backside, and probably your name's going to be mud because you didn't.
Am I allowed another one? I don't want to.
No, you're not allowed another one. Next question. Go on.
Right. Well, I'm supposed to be the natural history rep for Friends of Regent's Park.
Okay.
And they make their money out of playing fields.
Yes.
And I have this notion that, notwithstanding football games tonight, that we don't need to play football on immaculate lawns.
Yes.
And ryegrass and the rest of it are monocultures if this get out of hand. So is there a movement that you are aware of where dandelions and plantains and so on mixed with grasses can be regarded as a perfectly suitable playing surface for people wanting to play football or whatever game they want on a mixture of grass and plants that are diverse?
I don't know about a movement. I know there is, and something I implement into my projects where I'm sowing clovers, black medic, in with grass species as well. So you try and create clover lawns. I guess that is a question of. I know there's one football team. A football team called Forest Green Rovers that don't use any chemicals on their football pitch. But I don't understand what a movement.
Well, I'm just thinking that the country as a whole needs to embrace the idea that pure green lawns mowed for croquet or
100%.
bowls don't need to be pure.
No, they don't. But I guess there are set standards for football pitches set by, it's not British standard, but by.
Well, FIFA have got it wrong enough. They need to have a chat with you.
Yeah, well, they do. But but I think a sort of a broader point is, can you have areas of grass and lower growing plants, lower growing clovers that look green and give the lawn appearance, but still be pollinator friendly? Yes, 100%.
Thank you, everybody. This has been very fun. Thanks for coming. And nice to see you all. Hopefully, you get to have a chat to me after. And thanks for coming.